trying to learn as much cultural history and information, if you will, for in order to replace all the information that we were given over the years that was incorrect. Um, that being said, came from New York City, came from Harlem, ended up going to Howard University for College of Medicine, and that's where I met my wife. Over the years, we've had many conversations, and she's opened my mind in a great many ways, especially what she terms visual culture, and what ends up being very impactful, but many times underappreciated. So I'll kind of leave it at that.
Okay. All right. And Aziza, would you like to give us a little info on you?
Well, I'm a visual artist. I've been doing art all my life. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I attended Temple University, a part of Temple Tyler, for a couple of years, and then went to Temple University main campus and taught art for in the Philadelphia school system, and then went on to graduate school at Howard University. And that's where I met my wonderful husband. And we went on to move to New York for about 7 years and then returned to Washington, D.C. And all this time, I'm doing my art in one way, shape, or form or another. So and I was trained as a printmaker, and I combined printmaking, painting, collage, assemblage, and yeah, just a multimedia artist. Thank you.
I have to ask you, that piece of art that is behind you, is that one of your creations?
That's one of my pieces back there. It's from a series called Potentia,
Okay.
and it's about the potential of a people. Yeah, energy.
Okay. Well, it definitely has an African spiritual vibe to it, if I must say.
Yes.
All right. So glad to have you aboard. We talked about the presentation that you all did at the East Cleveland Public Library. Dr. Hunter, what was the genesis of that? Because I watched a video of you last night. I think you were with Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, and you had a PowerPoint presentation there. And I saw a similar theme in terms of the subject matter. So talk about how this concept came about and how you ended up in East Cleveland presenting it.
Well, had conferences over the years dealing with Black men's health. The conference in 2014, we focused on rites of passage. One of my dear friends, Dr. Atiba Kopik, told me about Paul Hill Jr. In Cleveland, Ohio, East Cleveland, and we invited Paul Hill Jr. and his son Fanon to present at the Optimal Health for Black Men conference that we had at Morgan State University. It was a good conference, and subsequently have been in touch with Fanon off and on over the years. And last maybe January or February, we started having a discussion about doing a presentation around reclamation of artifacts. So that was kind of the genesis of that. The Dr. Welsing piece, interestingly enough, was done, of course, or before Dr. Welsing made her transition. And that piece mostly focused on gentrification and kind of a form of erasure, as my wife likes to talk about, that was going on in DC. Dr. Welsing's home was next to a facility, was next to a place that really wanted to, have access to her property. And they did a lot of underhanded things to try to get her to move. But in the process, we fought, and ultimately, Dr. Welsing did not see the final result. Unfortunately, she passed a few years ago. But that being said, Yeah, Fanon wanted to kind of cover this as an issue and see if we could maybe make something available to the community about this. And because I like to dig into different things that I'm learning new, I had to go and do some research. So we presented to the young folks and to the community in Baltimore, where Fanon has the Youth Resiliency Institute, which is affiliated with National Rites of Passage Institute in East Cleveland, that is founded and supported by members in the East Cleveland community like yourselves, as well as Brother Paul Hill.
I have to ask this question in light of the fact that you brought up the gentrification in Washington, D.C., being mindful that a number of years have passed since that presentation occurred with you and Dr. Welsing. What have you seen in terms of gentrification in Washington, D.C.?
Well, we both could answer that. At one point, Marion Barry talked to us before he made his transition and told us at the time that gentrification was a national phenomenon. He was very clear with us about that. At one point, an article, maybe in the Washington Post or New York Times, or big newspaper, said that the gentrification in Washington, D.C. might have been the most rapid and aggressive in the whole country. And, if it isn't, it's surely close to it. Now, that's what we're seeing. Lots and lots of increased presence of, high rises and condominiums, very pricey, so pricey that most Black folks can't afford those. And it's an ongoing kind of problem. Every time my wife and I drive someplace we haven't been in a while, we're like looking and saying, "Oh, do you see that? Do you see that? Do you see that?" So it's an ongoing challenge. And the current mayor, we found out later, is very pro-development, whatever that means, but pro-developer, I should say that.
Yeah, the thing about development is that it usually is something that favors the elites. And as you described, gentrification in progress in Washington, D.C., we're seeing the same thing here in Cleveland. I know I live off a main thoroughfare here in Cleveland called East 105th Street, and I don't need to go 2 miles down East 105th Street, maybe a mile and a half or so. And there's a brand new high rise that was built. And I know that the rents in that place are probably somewhere around $2,000 to $3,000 a month. But what you have in those situations is you have a large number of people living in a building who are paying high rent to the exclusion of the people in that community, and the property values go up. And then the people who live in the periphery can't afford to pay the property taxes, and they end up getting squeezed out. So this is another way that we've been discriminated against. In your presentation, you talk about ways that our bodies have not been respected. You talk about ways that our art is in museums around the world, and obviously they have been taken from places across the planet, in Africa, where we are indigenous to. I want you to talk about, and I want to welcome Aziza into the conversation as well, about the value of our bodies, the value of our art, and things that we can do to push back against the ways that we've been appropriated and disrespected. And Aziza, if you would like to go.
Yes. Well, art is invaluable. It's more than the object. It's the story that accompanies the object. It's the materials that it is made from. It's the relationship between that object and the person or the community that values it. It tells a story of the era that it was produced in. It usually has some remnants of information about the time when it was created. So these things, we have to think of more, that they're more than that object that you see in front of you. And And that's very, very important, because I think of all the different art forms, I think the visual culture, our visual culture, is least understood. And we have the least amount of information about it, because of our situation as a people, with enslavement and being in situations where we do not own where we live. We found ourselves migrating or being, uh, um, very early sold to different places. So when you have an object, for you to carry it with you was difficult. So we lost so much, so many things, because of our, the history of our presence here. So these because we lost so much, because we lost these objects, we lost the stories that went with them. We lost their relationship to people, the relationship to concepts and ideas. We lost the aesthetic of the object itself, the designs of it, the form of it, the color of it. All of these things are pieces of our culture. And so it's a devastating thing. It's a devastating thing. And on top of all of that, we were in situations where the European would go in and confiscate these things from our communities, and they would bring them to their place, and they would mine them. That's what I call it, mining. It's like, what are those colors? What are those designs? What are those forms? What are the stories? What are the relationships? Somebody else was researching and finding and looking, and then using it to propel their own culture. So it is a ruthless and process. And all those countries where these things were taken from, they lost that information. And so it's a devastating process. It's a devastating thing that has happened.
It's really interesting when you talk about ruthlessness. I'm thinking about Merowe in the Sudan. And of course, you may know that there are more pyramids in the Sudan than there are in Egypt and other countries in the world. I was very privileged to visit there with Dr. Runoko Rashidi, who said quite often that he saw museums as repositories of stolen loot. But I'm thinking about the way the Europeans defaced those pyramids. They went in through the top in search of gold, and they just basically destroyed them because of their interest in loot, wealth, whatever they could find. And I'm thinking about how King Leopold just sent his folks into the Congo, declared that now this is his property, and he assumed ownership and ownership of it, and then commenced to participate in a genocide that the world had never seen in terms of the size of it. Thinking about Patrice Lumumba, and Dr. Hunter, you can corroborate this. He served as president for 7 months, just 7 months, and then they removed him from his position. They dismembered him, and then they reduced him to nothing with acid. I mean, how much more diabolical can someone be to erase the memory and the existence of someone. Could you talk to us about what lengths folks have gone through on the planet to basically disrespect folks? I think that was part of what you shared with the idea of stolen bodies.
Yeah, at the outset of the scramble for Africa, quote unquote, the genesis being the Berlin Conference, there was a notion that these people, if you were European, were just basically inferior. You know, it was determined at certain levels by, interestingly enough, by the Pope back when they created the Papal Bull, that basically goes along with what we just experienced the last few days with the Thanksgiving that the Native American folks consider the day of mourning. There was put into the psyche, into the cultural psyche of Europeans, that it was okay to go ahead and take, because you were in essence doing a civilizing mission. Now, by the time they did the scramble for Africa, they had already gone around the world. They had already enslaved us for a few hundred years at that point. But they developed tools. One of the tools they developed was in the academy was the field of anthropology, and the field of anthropology was one that's based on culture and the the cultural knowledge and the ways and beings of groups of people, and in terms of what they profess to teach, both in schools that they taught us and schools that they taught their own children, schools that they taught other colonized people, was that basically you have to understand that, white people are superior. They made up things like the hierarchy of humans, which was all bogus. A lot of stuff that created false narratives was propagandized in a very big way. So it traveled around the world. It traveled with a lot of intensity. And by the time you get to somebody as brilliant as Lumumba, there was a huge collaboration: United States, CIA, Britain, France, Belgium, to make sure that this rich land with great people and untold of wealth would never fall into the hands of the control of the people who were, less than human. I mean, basically, inferior, second class human beings. They even had gone at certain points in anthropology to link certain types of people, like the Khoisan that Sarah Bartman was a member of, as being intermediate beings. So you weren't really Homo sapiens, but you weren't an ape. But you had, groups like the Khoisan and the Mbuti in Congo as middle types of humanoids, but they weren't really truly humans. So all of this propaganda, coalesced in the era of our liberation struggles, in the many liberation struggles, of course, from when they first encountered us, but definitely in the 1960s, because at this point we had enough of groups of people with intimate knowledge of how the world worked. They had gone to school, they had come back, they understood colonialism, and they were ready to do everything they could to eradicate it.
There are probably some examples of the ways that we've been discriminated against. I know there were a plethora of them in your presentation. Can you talk about some of the ways that we, and you brought up Sarah Bartman as one of those examples. Can you talk about some of the other ways that we've been discriminated against physically?
Sure. So, the essence of the conversation was mostly around bodies and artifacts. The types of things that happened in some of the colonial situations were just basically looked upon from European textbooks as being us just giving up our people and our artifacts because we just didn't know better. There's a lot of, you know, propaganda inside of that. But for instance, you know, the Europeans would go into a place like Benin and just try to come up with some ways to pilfer what they wanted. At a certain point, the warriors, men and women in Benin, decided they had enough and they pushed back. They slaughtered some of the British military, and the British decided to send, you know, a larger contingent of soldiers to come, and they sacked a whole empire, if you will. With the sacking of that empire, they took of course, many artifacts, and among those, the very famous Benin bronzes. With the taking of the Benin bronzes themselves, that was a problem. But when we started looking at the numbers of items that were expropriated from our different parts in Africa, the numbers are astronomical. Some say over 500,000, some say over 1 million. That being the case, that was not probably, you know, the worst of it, because they took us. They took us to Brazil, took us to Central America, South America, and they made sure that, you know, the conditions we lived under were brutal, were harsh, and, you know, the whole notion of how slavery has been taught has been a challenge because it hasn't been really taught in its fullness. But, you know, that's one. The Benin bronzes was one. They did a similar thing in Cameroon, and similar things throughout the continent of Africa, Congo notwithstanding. And they had a notion that if they could engage enough of the African elite, and by the African elite, we might call them the compradors, we might call them the sellouts, what have you, we could make it happen. Now, one of the concepts behind, you know, the slave trade and the expropriation of the items is that we just gave up, you know, people. Now that did happen. There's no getting around that. But at a certain point, there was also, you know, very, very serious threats that if we come back to this land here, and you chief or you queen mother, or however you say it, don't provide us with, you know, people to enslave, we will come and enslave your people. And they came with force, and they came with a great deal of intensity. So I don't want, you know, our audience to think that, you know, Africans did not engage in this horrendous and horrific crime. But also, it has to be kept in the context that there were threats for total annihilation of peoples and villages. So, you know, I think that's a part of it. When we started looking at the places where they had taken artifacts, we also started thinking about where have they taken our people's bones, our people's remains. And that is another conversation, but it's a very important one, because even in this country, among the Native Americans and among Africans, there are many of our remains still locked up in museums, locked up in boxes in museums that have not been properly buried, given the proper spiritual and ceremonial treatments. And of course, Aziza and I years ago went on a cruise, and a part of the purpose for the cruise with the Temple of Inyame in DC was actually to try to give a proper spiritual burial to the many who had perished in the ocean.
Okay. I've got our brother Lynn Hampton on standby, but I also want to ask Aziza about the appropriation of our art, because European artists basically appropriated, just like the Greeks did, appropriated from Kemet civilization. But there have been European artists that have appropriated from African artists. Can you talk about ways that appropriation has taken place?
Well, absolutely. There is currently an exhibition up at the Phillips Collection where they're looking at modern art in relationship to the Europeans' exposure to African art. So you have the development of Cubism from, and you can actually, if you look at some of the quote unquote modern artists in their studios, sometimes you can actually see African artifacts in their space. And this is true of Picasso. This type of uh, um, inspiration, to be nice, inspiration that was gathered from our work, you can see in the work of Matisse, Moreau, and several, the whole notion of modern art, a lot of it was developed during the time when Africa had been chopped up and the artifacts were being confiscated and brought to European countries. This interfacing with these objects, gave a different, what can I say? Let's say the African sculpture, the way in which with some of the objects, some of the sculpture, you can see the front and the back almost at the same time, the use of shadow, the use of form, the simplification of form. This gave European artists new notions of how to depict reality. So it had a tremendous impact on European artists. The use of color, the bright colors, the use of pattern, and many times not understanding the pattern, because many times for us, the patterns actually had meanings. So these were some of the things that were stolen and incorporated into European art. So I want to go over some of those again. So form, color, pattern, the space, instead of space trying to always look as if it is three-dimensional space, the flattening of space, which we did many times in our sculpture and our imagery. The simplification of not going after the photographic 3D notion of what you see, but simplifying it and getting to the essence of that person that you see. Not just does it look like, but how do I get to the essence of who this person is? How do I show that this person has integrity? How do I show that this person is kind? How do I show that this person is, let's say, a good mother? The hands might be enlarged, the child held close to the mother, and the hands being enlarged. The person of integrity the head might be enlarged. So there was this very abstract thinking that went on in the development of African art, whereas the European was more looking towards the reproduction of exactly what they saw. And so when they came face to face with this work, it really opened up some new ways of thinking and seeing that had not gone on before. And I'm sorry that I do not have the exact name of that that exhibition, which I will try to find that and give that to you before we leave. But right now at the Phillips, there is an exhibition up that is inquiring and exploring the relationship between African art and modern art.
Well, it's interesting as you describe process and concept, that we could learn so much from art if we got an education in it. And as we look at the current education system, we get very little information about art. As a matter of fact, many schools don't even really have art in the curriculum. Here in Cleveland, we have Cleveland School of the Arts, and then the other students are left out of having a connection with art. But as you described it, if we could get more education about art, the meaning of art, going to museums and seeing those artifacts and getting the stories behind them, perhaps having our own museums where we could put our stuff on display and provide that education, it could go a long way towards us understanding history as you've described it. Brother Hamptonio, I'm sure you've been listening and taking it in. Did you have any questions or observations that you wanted to make as we continue to move forward?
Yes, yes, of course. It's very interesting when you look at this art thing and what we're discussing here, and just look at the other side, or the esoteric, or the spiritual side of what's going on. First, by studying the people and then knowing African culture, you have to know that Africans just didn't do something for nothing. Everything had a reason and a meaning and a relationship to their surroundings, to the cosmos, to the planet, and what have you. And I'm sure, they express this in their art. And,
Absolutely.
yes, and those colors all has a significance. If you look at those Adinkra symbols and things like that, and signs, they all have a relationship. And if we was able to really tap in and understand African culture, it would show you really how, and tell you how significant it is with, and how damaging it has become with the theft of this particular art. Because it told the story of the legacy, the history, things that were passed down to the next generation. So just think about that culture, that legacy being stolen, being ripped out, being taken away from a group of people. Where does that leave them? Because we may look at it as being some aesthetics. Oh, that's nice, that's pretty, and things of that nature. But it told a story. It carried the legacy, it carried the memory and the traditions of the people and those relationships. And then when you get into the whole colors and the symbols, and you see how, and you start studying, energy and vibrations and things like that, God knows what kind of energy that was being presented from those particular items to help keep, a person in a certain type of the right mindset that the community needs them to be in. So it's and it's a sad thing, with this rape that has taken place in Africa. How many artifacts and are in the basement of these folks up in Europe somewhere? How, what's there that we can, we can't even imagine. Probably could tell the, unfold some of the lies and the truths that's been told so far and so deep about history, about Black folks, about spirituality, the cosmos, and all that. We ain't gonna even get into the library and the books. So this stuff is just atrocious, and it's just a testament, really, in telling the story about where we are as a people. Like as Dr. Henry Clark said, we don't have no friends. So that's what we have to really drill down on our culture and who we are and what we are, because it's a psychopathic thing that's going on with us as Black folks, and and we really have to shake these mental shackles and really go back to the root and to the source to recapture ourselves.
I wanted to speak to this issue of art education and, the imagination, the ability to imagine and the ability to create are powerful, powerful, powerful entities. Um, and I think that there is a reason why our schools don't have the the art education that they should have. And because it would exercise the ability to imagine. And imagination is when you can think beyond what is, that's powerful. And even in our imagining, many times we are given, this whole thing of science fiction is very interesting, how we are given what to imagine. So even in our development of our imagination, it falls within the context that has already been given to us. One of the things that our own art, if we had it there, if we were studying it, if we began to understand it, one of the things that it does is it gives us a new realm of possibilities from which to imagine. So this art education and the art education that when we do get it, it is the art education that is given to us, and we need a new grouping of art educators that are thinking in terms of taking our own cultures, our own stuff, and mining it for us in the best interest of Black people, to look to find the stories, to find the meanings to the patterns and the colors and the forms and the relationship of the object to the person who owned it, to the society in which it was found. In those stories, in those understanding, that can become a foundation for a whole new opening of the universe of imagination and creativity.
I really like what you said about the importance of envisioning and how art plays a role in that. I'm also mindful of the fact that art can play a role in revolution, so to speak, because of the way we use it to communicate. Can you talk a little bit about how we can use that art as a tool of liberation?
Absolutely. We can begin to see new realities for how to be. We have been told who we are. And through our art, through the art and the visual culture of our people throughout the world, when we interface with that, when we learn the stories that are connected to that, it opens up new realities. If you have I'm trying to think of, an Nkisi sculpture where it has all of these objects that are penetrating it, that were hit and penetrated that sculpture, increasing its power. These are different. These are ideas that you will not find when you go into a museum and look at a Rodin sculpture. That idea of power is not, you do not find that there, where things are pounded into it to release and multiply the power of that thing. You see, so this is another way of thinking, another way of understanding the universe and how you interface with that universe. So yes, from that can come new and different ideas of liberation, what that looks like, how you get to that liberation. All of that can come from interfacing with these things.
Dr. Hunter, I wonder if you could parallel the idea of liberation through art with liberation through education, because I know we get so little of our history and our understanding about who we are through education. And it seems as though education is really more training than it is bringing out of folks what's in them. Talk about how education can be used as a tool of liberation.
Oh, sure. Great question. There's a educator from back in the 80s, 90s named Mwalimu Shuja. He worked with the Council of Independent Black Institutions. And he said that what we're getting now is schooling, not education. So to your point, it's preparation for service. A part of what we've seen as the underpinning of, white domination, white supremacy, whatever you choose to call it, has been their manipulation of education and getting us to buy into certain aspects of it and not rejecting others. So, technical knowledge and things to improve your lives, that's of course okay. But it always comes with a kind of a trick. And the trick always is that you're never quite good enough, no matter how good Black people do, or brown people, or Native people, you're never quite good enough. And, this meets with internal noise, cognitive dissonance, some might say, but internal noise, where, as one brother said in a book about Harlem, he said the greatest power they have over us is not in the guns and the bombs, it's in their ability to create self-doubt. And that is, I think, part of the problem that we run into with the, European design educational system. Two giants, Walter Rodney and Fidel Castro, were very clear about having to capture the education of the students very early and get them to be committed to the betterment of their own people's situation, their future, their plight. So I think those are two pieces that I think are so important. And, to your point about art and education, there is, in our people's philosophy, there was really no difference between spirit and secular. They all kind of work together. This goes back to people who talk about what was going on in ancient Kemet, and of course, Nubia, Sudan, where you had visited. That reality is very missing in Western education, and that the whole notion of being true to yourself, to your people, practicing ma'at, truth, justice, righteousness, reciprocity, spirituality. Those things were bedrocks for our people prior to the encounter that we've had for these last, I don't know, that Chancellor Williams says, several thousand years, but definitely in the last 500 years. And the educational piece, if we never get in charge of it, we have no ability to wonder why our children are not working in our best interests. So I think, just to veggie back on what you were saying, there's a clear determinative reason to not let us get control of education. One of the biggest things that we ran into when Aziza and I moved back to Harlem in the 80s was Professor Jeffries and Professor Clark, Dr. Ben, were teaching students at City College a great deal about history and culture, and just going to generate a whole new group of scholars. The City University and the world jumped down their throat. And, you beget people like Skip Gates as a result of that. And Jeffries was fighting all the time just to try to tell the true history of the African existence. So, it's going to be a fight. We have to get ourselves ready. A part of the talk has to do with institutional structures like Harvard and Princeton and Yale, all of those schools that are held up as huge important institutions. They all, number one, were built on the backs of our enslavement and the African slave trade. But number two, they also have the biggest impact on the propaganda of what's taught. So, this is an entry point. So when Aziza talks about the art and the artifacts of being an entry point, it makes you ask questions that you may never be asked in the academy or going through school. So I think it's hugely important.
Just a question. It's real quick. It's just amazing though how it seems like those people of that type of status. When we talk about the Gates and Cornells, Wesses of the world, why they haven't seem to not take the right amount of interest in being able to teach your own. That's it's something that Malcolm has said. How are you letting the system? I'm not going. I don't want to say enemy, but we can't say enemy. Teach your children. You know, and I don't know when we're going to understand that. Because this love affair we have with the system that we see is not working on it, and it seems very obvious that we're going to have to, at some point in time, teach our own and tell our own story. Dr. Amos Wilson said, if your educational system does not teach its children to fix the problems that you currently face, then you're failing as a society. And so again, we sitting back and we allowing and we getting mad when the system that we are taking our kids to don't teach and tell our story, then we got an issue with that. But why should they tell our story? It's not in their best interest to tell our story. So this thing of education. And one last point I wanted to say about when we was talking again about the art, and you can find that kind of cultural this say deposit of black folks in the dance, into the drum, into the dance, and all of that is all important in telling our story. Maybe somewhere down 100 years or more. So I guess that's what we're gonna have to ask ourselves: what this culture, music, and dance and art is going to tell about us in our past to our future generation. What is it going to say about us?
Absolutely.
That's something we have to think about as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Did you want to embellish on that, Ziza?
Yes. I was thinking, well, one of the things that we talked about when we were in Ohio there, to that beautiful, beautiful community, was the idea of taking a look at art that you have that people owned, and relating the story about it to the children, to the younger people. If we don't tell the story, then there will be no link there between them and that particular object. I have things from my grandfather. My grandfather looked for items that had images of Black people. So I have some sculptures that he was able to attain. And so that helped me to understand that our people were of interest to my father, that he wanted to know about Black folks and what we did and what we achieved. And so that helped to instill that in me. So these stories that of items that we have can help to bolster young people's understanding, young people's commitment to their people. And there are wonderful, wonderful stories that when the Museum of African American Culture, History and Culture was built here in Washington, D.C., the director talked about going across the country and people having things in their basements and attics and stored in their house or placed in their home that had stories. And many of those things are now in that museum. But that took the people that owned it to tell that story to their children, to their relatives, so that it was known. And when he came, they could say, yes, this was the Bible of this person. This was the shawl of that person. And these are some of the things that the person did in the community, in the country, in the world. And then these things were collected by the museum. And now we have that story. So what I'm trying to say here is that we have pieces of the story. Yes, they tried to erase. Yes, they tried to change the meanings of things, and yes, they tried to destroy. But we have the pieces that we have to hold them close. We have to value them. We have to tell their stories. We have to know what we can know about that thing. If there are elders that are in the family that can tell you more about that bowl that your grandmother had that was precious to her, then you have to learn that story.
Okay, we're going to button things up on the terrestrial broadcast and move over to our online platform so you can continue to listen and watch on YouTube and Facebook. And we implore you to become involved. You can make comments and we'll definitely get you on the show. We'd like to thank our engineer, Tone Harley, for making this broadcast possible in this form. And we'd like to thank you for listening. As always, we like to tell you, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Make today your best day. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us. Peace.
Peace.
And we're going to ask our guests to hang on because we're going to continue our conversation online. All right. Thank you to you who have been with us on YouTube. We've got folks watching on YouTube and also folks watching us on Facebook. And just so that you know, you can watch our show on the 360 Info Network Facebook page. You can also go to my Facebook page, which is Vince Robinson. You can join us on Hamtonio's YouTube channel, and that is The Journey with Hamtonio. And to our guests who are on with us now and those who join us in the future, if you have a YouTube channel, you can also broadcast this broadcast on your YouTube channel. So if you didn't get the first hour, you just joined us, you can go to YouTube and you can watch this program again. We have two very great guests with us. We have Dr. Jawara K. Hunter, who is an academic researcher. That's the first time I've actually heard that term. So it must be special because I know he is. And he's also a physician. He's an anesthesiologist. So he puts folks to sleep and he brings them back. And we also have his wife. She is Aziza Gibson Hunter. She's a very gifted artist, and you can see some of her fantastic work behind her. It's full of beauty. It's full of color. It's full of things that others have appropriated from us. We appreciate you for carrying this standard forward because it's definitely a part of our culture. We have been working to bring you information visually, and now we've got it worked out. Dr. Hunter has his screen sharing abilities on par. So
it's working, huh?
There you go. So we welcome you to share some information with us now via your PowerPoint.
Wow, thanks. And thank you all so much for hanging in there with us. It's really a privilege and an honor to be asked to present to an audience that I'm sure is very special. And I did want to do a little bit about cultural imperialism because we've been talking about it, but more about, let me go back here just a little bit, about something that Fanon wanted to talk about was a couple of tragedies that we had to deal with. One was, of course, Sarah Bartman. Ota Benga was a young brother who was kidnapped and placed in the Bronx Zoo in 1906. Very, very telling that they would kidnap a human and put them in a cage. Here's a photo of him. African American preachers, ministers, community was trying to get him released. He was not released, and he eventually committed suicide. Henrietta Lacks, we know a lot about her, for her cells were expropriated, and they were used to create a great deal of medical research. Her family never gave permission, and you know, while they have, of course, gotten some notoriety right now, the notion that they could take from us and use us again. This is something that Brother Fanon Hill wanted us to kind of just think about and kind of dissect. On the last piece of the tragedies had to do with the MOVE bombing. My wife is from Philadelphia. Interesting group of people named MOVE who were anxious to create a new reality, and they ostracized some members of the community. You will see here in the picture, Wilson Good, the mayor, was at the time an African-American man, but I think he lost control, similar to, I think, Obama lost control in some things like Libya and Honduras, where they dropped a bomb on these people. Can you imagine that? Just like in Tulsa. And the sister, Patricia Dotson, her body was destroyed, unfortunately, and her bones were in several labs for years before she was finally given a burial. So those things are reality. That's a more current reality. Sarah Bartman was the 1700s, but MOVE was in the 1980s. Medical history and things of that nature. This is a picture of the a shot from the British Museum. Just to give you an idea, this is a small space that they appropriated a lot of our artifacts. But a medical history piece that we want to talk about that's probably the most difficult to talk about was this man had been valorized as the father of gynecology, J. Marion Sims. You see him with a sister looking at him. This sister was one of his experiments where the Americans learned about gynecology by him doing surgery on our sisters, and with very little to no anesthesia for years. So what do we do about this? Well, this is the next part of that, is that, you know, we're going to activate, you know, Black Power, as Brother Kwame Ture and Brother Amos Wilson talked about in their work, and the artists are out front. These are artists performing on Fifth Avenue in New York City at the taking down and the masterful work of them and other activists to bring light to this, and the sculpture was brought down. As many other sculptures are being brought down by activists like the people on this call and the people on this broadcast. We have some power. A little bit about cultural imperialism. I won't go into it too deep, but Marimba Ani, who is a friend of ours, a very dear friend, so much so that Aziza's image is on the cover of her book, Yurugu, talks about that the essence of European domination is there a need to control. It's a it's a drive that they have. And one more piece about cultural imperialism is that the ideology of the West is that they are to dominate nature. And what I think is something that we have to keep in contact with whenever we engage with people who think like this, is that they believe they have a moral justification for their behaviors, as well as colonialism and the slave trade. I'm going to skip around a little bit because I think that this one is important also. And I think this is something that, of course, those of us who've been in the struggle for a while understand. And that is that Western man has long accepted the necessity of lies. That's a hard one to deal with because we don't lie by nature just because, but this is a part of their culture. Yurugu would call it their asili, their seed thought.
Mm.
A picture here from Cameroon, and this is probably 1890s, 1900s. And I just wanted to bring to attention that this was a stool made for a chief. So now we talk about how the chief, with the concept of having a connection to the ancestors, to the creator, to the future. And this stool would probably be, he might be the only person to ever sit on the stool, the reigning chief. But look at this European conquistador with their foot on the stool. It's probably something that they just forgave in their own way, but I guess it's just a cultural manifestation of two different ways of seeing the world. A cultural more pieces about cultural imperialism. Marimba identifies that the political genius of the West has been to attack culture and therefore ideological destruction of the people it conquered. And it is very, very important, like Brother Hamtonio just talked about, as well as Brother Benjamin, that they dominate the intellectual, educational space of the people who they conquer. That's not by mistake. Steve Biko, our hero, talked about our necessity of having educational schemes worked out to correct the damage done to ourselves. And here Biko is clear: cultural imperialism is warfare. I'm going to let my wife say a few things about cultural imperialism in through here too, because she and I have had these conversations for a long time. She, for those of you who may, have gone to art school or may not have gone to art school, my wife had to leave art school at a certain point, and I think she bumped up against cultural imperialism. Aziz, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I think when I entered undergraduate school, it became clear to me in the first months that I had entered a theater of war. And by that, I mean that the school had a particular narrative and process that I was to go through to become a quote unquote artist. And I came there, and I don't know why I thought I was going to get it there, but I came there looking for images, ideas, concepts that would be elevating to my people. And so there was a clash. And so this idea of cultural imperialism is it is here, and it is with us even today. And so yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I thought that would be a good point, a good part of understanding, because the people who choose to dominate us want to dominate us completely. And just like it seems important to make sure that our cultural icons in music or in sports or in entertainment are saying the right things to benefit, the dominant culture, we have to understand that the notion of who's going to get to be an artist, who gets displayed. I mean, Aziza can talk about that for a long time. That's a very important part. We have always had people who resisted, but the challenges have always been to get, to make it operational and to be able to be seen.
Mhm. Here's the thing too. We're not gonna you know solve this problem. Uh, you know, taking on the same system that got us here. We have to somehow, and fortunately, history tells us it never was the masses of the people that actually affected the change. The sheep will usually follow, a small group of people who had the direction that made the change. So we have to somehow get into this uh, into the minds and the mindsets of individuals to make us love ourselves again and love our culture, because the system has done so great of a job of having us so far removed from who we are in our God consciousness that we just in love. We in total in love, with this system. So until we kind of got to trick our people into loving themselves and their culture, and understanding how many jewels that our ancestors have left for us to learn and understand this thing called life. There's a old African proverb said, "You don't teach the path of the forest to an old gorilla." Now here we got new kids, that I call them new kids on the block, that just come about into civilization, culture, and not living with the animals and that the Moors taught them and all these things like that. Now you got this new culture trying to teach the old culture what time it is, how to live, what's a community, what's your relationship to nature and God and things like that. And look, in this very short amount of time, where it has gotten us. Look where we at. Food messed up, water messed up, air messed up, ecosystem messed up, ozone out of balance, layer. Everything is going amok. And that's why I say it has to be mental, and we dealing with a battle for our minds. Is that how can we still, you know, go along with this? I used to do an analogy of, black folks to me sometimes is like sitting on a train that is going down the track 500 miles an hour without a conductor. Instead of them panicking and wanting to get off the train, they reading the newspaper, listening to elevator music. And so you can see that we're about to crash. You can see the system going down, but that's why this is so important. To release these mental shackles, and the only way to do that, well, one of the ways of doing that is making us fall in love and see some relevance and some importance, and like our sister Aziza said, into the art, into the culture, let me say this right here. I got to say this one point here. We just come out of Thanksgiving, you know. And I can probably if I say something about Christmas and Thanksgiving, my people will give me about 100 million excuses why they still partake in it. And just like you said, Doc, they call it the Native American calls what the day of mourning, right? Where folks died, got killed, and things like that. So we would have an excuse. Give you an excuse every time about keeping on with the tradition, because it's tradition, and so it I would say if we knew our culture and we knew our people and things of that nature, you would have a whole bunch of times to get together with your people and deal with a coming together. People say, "Hey, I just want to come with it's just a day of my family now, and I'm just doing it because of this. I'm just doing it because of that." If you understood your culture and their rituals and their traditions and stuff like that, I mean, one thing Black folks do know is being spiritual people. We got we doing a dance for harvest. We doing the dance for the sun. We doing, I mean, it's all kind of ceremonies that we have done and partake of. So if you understood and got into your culture, there's many things you can do to have these gatherings that you want to have and not give energy to those things that was negative. Could you imagine that we're sitting here going along and praising and giving energy to negative things? How is that going to work for you? You know what I'm trying to say? It's a negative phenomenon that took place during this Thanksgiving situation. And we giving energy to that by dealing with, that's when you want to really get into the whole spiritual connotation of the thing. And when you really, really want to talk about spirituality, it's about timing, it's about energy, it's about thoughts and all those things. So if you're giving energy to that, what are you doing?
Well, I don't think that we have to give energy to that. I think that we can, and this is where the imagination comes in, because we can redesign. We can, just as Karinga developed Kwanzaa, we can develop our own meanings for why we come together, rituals. What happens when a family holds hands and calls out the names of all the different relatives that have gone on to become ancestors? What happens when that goes on during some
gathering or something? Yeah, I
a
got you.
gathering? Exactly. We can empower these times to work for us. We have that. We can do that.
I think what happens is we experience our culture without fully understanding that that's what we're doing. You know, it's just like when we're in church and we get the Holy Ghost. You know, this is part of who we are as a people. You know, these things just kind of happen incidentally, but I think what's really important is for us to have a conscious awareness of it. You know, and that's the key. Dr. Hunter has talked about the ways that they've tried to alter history or change history or redefine. And I think what you said, Aziza, is really important. And that is us seizing the power to define, seizing the ability to perpetuate the cultural traditions that have been a part of who we are. You know, I was thinking about the oral tradition when you talked about how important it is for young people to understand the art. Well, that awareness comes as a result of someone who is an elder in the community passing down that information and that knowledge to those who come after them. And then they repeat the same process. And that way, you know, we observe our various traditions. You know, you talked about standing in that circle and acknowledging the ancestors. Well, we have to do that, because when we stop speaking the names of our ancestors, they cease to exist. So, you know, just going back to the program that the East Cleveland Public Library that took place, and seeing Elder Paul Hill pour a libation and invoke the names of the ancestors. These are things that we must embrace in order for us to be authentically who we are. You know, I love the fact that Dr. Hunter has on the print that he has on right now, because it is a reminder to us of who we are, where we come from, an exemplification of our ancestry. It's a real subtle thing, but it just exemplifies who we are. The artwork that is behind, you know, Mrs. Gibson Hunter, the same thing. You know, these things exist in our environment to give us a clue, to give us information, to give us positivity, to uplift us, because we are connected to our identity and we exist in the power that we have as beings on this planet. You know, one of the most important things that they have done to us is that they have redefined us. So they have us in a headspace of, some of us, that we're lesser than. You know, we use the term minority when the truth of the matter is we're the most populous people on the planet. But then we reduce ourselves to minority. You know, we use terms like white supremacy. White supremacy does not exist. They're not superior to us, never have been. So we continue to give that phrase power by repeating it. I say pseudo white supremacy. I call it a psychosis, because that's what it really is. You know, when you think about what Dr. Welsing did when she came back with her theory of genetic annihilation, and she talked about those various ways that, you know, somebody really has an inferiority complex and they're overcompensating for their inferiority by being bullies all over the world. That's the history that we've been stuck with, Dr. Hunter. Could you elaborate on that just a bit?
No, I think you're right on point about that. Dr. Wilson was a good friend of ours. When I was in medical school, 1977, when I started, I never met anybody in the world like her. Another sister named Dr. Alice Kaladi, another psychiatrist, and was just it's so clear that you had to have a different way of thinking when dealing with the global reality that we all had experienced. That there was a pattern, and subsequent to that, there was more scholarship coming out of the social science writers that we had, the literary writers that we had, and of course the artists. They were always very clear that there's a new way to look at this stuff. And I think many times the artists are the first ones to be able to put this out there like that. Dr. Welsing's caught a lot of static, and she had to had to take a lot of pushback, a lot of times from Black folks as well, because the information was it was so unusual to hear something like that. But then again, we were NIGs for a while, then we became colors, then we became Negroes, then we became Blacks, then we became Africans. So it's a process going on here, and I can understand that first time hearing it was difficult. If I could show a couple of more slides.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to this and get back to here. So I'm gonna move on a little bit because there was a couple of pieces of artists that I wanted maybe Aziza to kind of talk about a little bit. This is a picture of an Oxford Museum, just to give you an idea of the scale of the theft. It's almost impossible to be able to get your head around it. And there was a National Geographic that came out recently about the looting and what some museums are doing. There's been a lot of pushback in many ways. Now, this story about the Golden Stool is interesting because, again, we talk about spirit and spirituality, the cultural meaning to a people. According to legend, Akomfo Anoche was one of the founders of the Asante Confederacy, and the Golden Stool believed to house the spirit of the Asante, living, dead, and yet to be born. That spirit might not translate exactly into English because it might mean a little bit more to the African native speaker. They they do the best they can with a translated word like spirit, but spirituality, of course, is very important to us. And I wanted to identify that the European thought he could just sit on this golden stool. They wanted to find the golden stool because they thought if they got the golden stool, they could annihilate the people's self-concept and self-worth. Well, Yaa Asantewaa and the chief said it's not happening, and they decided to fight a liberation struggle. But more to this, restitution has to do with returning remains. Germany has been absolutely crazy with it. But who holds the most is Belgium, interesting enough. We've had artists and activists identify it's time to return the remains. We've had ceremonies like Brother Hamtonio just talked about, ceremonies for restitution. And here's a picture of Lumumba. And all they were able to find from you, Brother Vince, as we talked about, is that all they could find is a single tooth was left after they put Lumumba in acid. Wow. And they returned the tooth. Restitution also in the form of the Prime Minister of Barbados, here's the President of Ghana, making those connections back in time. So I'm going to skip along a couple of slides here because there's a reclamation article, some artifacts. Here's an interesting concept. The Europeans decided that some of their museums should now be called universal museums, and that the stolen works had now become a part of the heritage of the nations that housed them. Now, how about what Dick Gregory said? Dick Gregory said, "You catch me in a stolen car. I didn't steal this car. I discovered it." Say, like what?
Oh my goodness!
Talk about old, some more beautiful artifacts. But I did want to skip to Aziza to talk about a couple of people that she knew very well. And maybe we can talk about their
yeah, Doc. That's what they want. See, they setting themselves up from time to come, so it'll be all forgotten. Slavery to be forgotten.
Right.
All our accomplishments be forgotten. You go into this next 50 years.
It's a universal museum now. Y'all just got to get over it, So we're gonna go real quick. This is a restitution movement slide NAGPRA was for Native Americans, but African Americans are also engaged. Local Black cemetery struggle is going on now in the Maryland area, in the Maryland, DC area, and it's important to become involved. But this was Aziza's identification of mining. You want to talk about this a little bit more, Aziza?
Yes. When the objects are taken, they are studied. They are studied, and there are aspects of those objects that can help to elevate the thief's culture.
Mm-hmm.
So today we see let's say the modern art was a place where I was looking, and so you see Cubism, and they talk about Cubism and Braque and Picasso and the many other artists of that period, but that came from studying and mining and being inspired by the works of African people. And not only does that go on to inspire these artists, but then it has implications for architecture, design, furniture design, fabrics. These become industries. These become industries that are affected by the aesthetics of African people and exploited. They're exploited. So this is now what we can do. And I think it's really important to focus on what we can do and what we have done. One thing I want to hold up: every young person that goes to college and takes those Black Studies courses, the ones that major in Black Studies, that are writing the dissertations, that are writing the thesis, that are writing the books, that are helping us to piece together, to remember. We are remembering. These young people and scholars that are doing this work are our warriors. Those are the warriors, because they're giving us the tools to be able to fight, to return to our best selves. So I want to give praises to the young people and the scholars that are doing this work. And that work that they do helps artists like myself. I can read their books. It can open up ideas that I'm not going to get in art school. I'm just not going to get it. When I take that philosophy course in art, when I study color, I'm not going to get the things that I can get from these, from the work that these scholars do, are Black scholars that go into curation, that go into art history, that are reinterpreting, helping us to remember, bringing our ideas together again, open up and help to open up new realities that I can express through my art. So this is it's dynamic, and we need language. We have to develop language for our experience. They give us language, but we can develop our own language for. I have a friend that talks about Blackstraction. She has said, wait, whoa, I'm going to take the reins of this. So this is a artist here in Washington, D.C., Sheila Kreider. And that is just one example of having the work that we have to do to develop language that empowers us, to develop concepts that work for us. When we bring our spirituality into our reality, we are doing something, we are bringing together something that our ancestors knew so well. So we can do this. I mean, we have the ability to do this. And I think that sometimes we give them a little too much power, because we do have to ask ourselves the question, what is it about us? What is it about us that would make a people create entire systems to subjugate them? If you really felt that we were, inferior, there would be no need to do that. We'd be inferior, you're superior, you can just run circles around us. No, there's something about us. We are so much more than who we have been told we are.
Yeah. I want to kind of veggie back, to use Dr. Hunter's term, on the point that you were making about language, and the point that you were also making about our scholars. And I'm thinking of a brother that we know, and we've had him as a guest on our show a couple of times. His name is Asar Imhotep. And Asar Imhotep is someone who is very much into linguistics, and he studies African languages. He studies Kemet and so forth and so on. I think there is power in understanding the words that we're using. And I think part of our issue is that we don't do the study. We don't look into the etymology, and we become victimized by words that are used against us. But when we understand, for instance, the power in a name. Your name is Aziza. I know that Aziza has a meaning that is special to you and is part of what defines you as a person. What we do in our culture many times is we give our children names that have no meaning at all, because we made up the name, or the name might be related to a European language that has no relationship to who we are as a people. So language is extremely important. Language is one of the ways that we empower ourselves, through song, through art, through the ways that we have impacted the entire planet. Yesterday I saw a video of a young Palestinian child, and the young Palestinian child was rapping the way we rap back in the 80s. You remember that?
Mhm.
It had a certain rhythm to it. It had a certain authenticity about it in terms of the thoughts that were being expressed. But most importantly, his rap reflected his reality. And that's the impact that we have had around the world, because you can go to Korea, they rapping. You go to Japan, they're rapping. You go to China, they're rapping. You probably go to Indonesia, and you got some young Indonesian children that are rapping. So, you look at the impact that we have had around the planet. If you just look at music, for instance, you've got jazz. It's a music that is unique to us. It was born out of our experience. And around the world, you've got elite musicians playing in orchestras, playing our music, and we sitting on the sidelines looking in at them doing our thing. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
We've had such an impact around the world, but yet again, we look at ourselves as being lesser than, when in actuality, we're the creators. I mean, the African woman is the mother of all civilization. And many of us don't really fully understand the implication of that. Dr. Hunter, you pointed out a couple of things that I had to write them down. You talked about an idea of dominating nature. When you look at the African concept, and the African concept is that we coexist with nature. We're one and the same. When we think about what God is, well, God is nature, and then take it a step further. We talk about Mother Nature. Wow, that's a pretty profound thought when you connect that to what God is. But then when you look at the construct of religions, they took the feminine aspect out of God.
Mm.
They said Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Well,
Mm.
what happened to the feminine aspect of that concept of God? So there's just so much within our own culture, within our own understanding of who we are in relation to the universe that could really empower us if we really embraced it and pushed back from the ways that we have been redefined. You wanted to comment, Dr. Hunter?
Yeah, I mean, programs like yours is a part of the solution. I mean, we have to look for solutions, and you're putting out good information, and you have a nice platform. It's attractive, and the information is going to be helpful to people. Along those lines of language, it harkens one to think about. Let me get back to my slide real quick. Harkens back to think about what was called at one point the Harlem Renaissance. What was the Harlem Renaissance but a collaboration among folks who were saying, we want to think some different thoughts. We want to go ahead and do some different things. Artists as change agents, artists as cultural keepers, artists as observers, researchers, and teaching, opening us up to see new ways of thinking and seeing our potential. As Malidoma Somé said, artists always have one foot in the spirit world. These are important people. And here's a Frederick Douglass quote that I was happy to come across in DC. Without culture, there can be no growth. Without exertion, no acquisition. Without friction, no polish. Without labor, no knowledge. Without action, no progress. Without conflict, no victory. And he started this whole concept with culture. And the cultural reality is those words, those concepts, those deeds, and we have some cultural warriors to look at. Robeson. And we have people who have done just the opposite of what Robeson would do, right? Who are these folks fighting for? Jim Crow. Here's one that was a Harlem Renaissance giant, Aaron Douglas. When we were in the County Cullen Library, Aziza and I were in 1987, used to do classes, tutoring, and she was teaching art class. And there was an image in the County Cullen Library of Aaron Douglas that needed preservation. Aziza told the librarian, you need to get on top of this. This is a precious piece of artwork. Aaron Douglas had done it inside the library. Here's another famous artist, Jacob Lawrence. Down here is about the Great Migration. A very famous sister whose artwork is not well known, Augusta Savage, a master sculptor. And here, this piece here was in the World's Fair, and because they didn't want to transport it, it was destroyed. This is a contemporary of Aziza. You want to talk about Valerie Maynard some, Aziza?
Oh, wonderful sister, wonderful sister. Part of the Black Arts movement, a printmaker, a sculptor, just tremendous person, a tremendous force, a tremendous love for Black people that you can see it in the work. And that's one of the things about the work that is created by our artists. Looking at it is a way of consuming it. Looking at it is a way it can move you. It can, I have looked at artwork that has made my heart skip a beat. So, I mean, there is an important communication that happens there.
Aziza, if I could interrupt you, I wanted to get you to one slide here. Is Charles White, who actually taught Aziza at one point.
Oh, yeah, Charles White. A wonderful draftsman. Drawings are just absolutely powerful. The dignity that he gives Black folks. And Black folks that don't have a lot. I mean, yes, he had done beautiful drawings of Belafonte, Eartha Kitt during his time, but the farmers, the laborers, the women, just powerful, life-enforcing images. So he was a great person, and he told us about how he was asked to do posters for different movies that were demeaning to Black people, and he refused. He said, "No, I'm not doing it."
Mhm.
And I remember just being so grateful that he understood the power of what he did and refused to use it in that way.
I'm going to move to another one. Catlet is huge.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and I wanted to move to this. And this is something that Aziza is very, very conversant in because she knows people who have been in the Black Arts movement. And if you talk about an explosion, this was it.
Well, the thing about the Black arts, about AfriCobra, that I deeply respect is that they sat down and talked about and designed how to create arts movement. And they talked about aesthetically, they had a palette, certain colors that they wanted to concentrate on. They wanted to do work. They did a lot of work were prints because they could be a print is something that you can do editions of. So you could do more than one, right? And where would they show these? They would show the work in the community on fences so that it would be right there with the people. So there was they designed a movement that created work to reinforce and remember Black folks. And we can do this today. We can do this today. Artists out there can form groups, determine what it is that they want to focus on to uplift our people, and then create the work to do it and talk about what it's going to look like, where it's going to be shown, what are going to be the attributes of it, who the audience is. We can do this. And I think that AfriCobra is a beautiful example of developing a movement. Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think to Brother Vince's point, the literary folks, Baraka and Haki and Sonia and and so many others contributed mightily to that undertaking.
Absolutely. They were a part. The poets and the artists were working together. The poetry was helping to inspire imagery. And so the way that these can interlock is very, very, it's amazing.
Well, the other thing that I need to invoke, and you talk about art as a way to show history and to capture history and culture, but you also talked about envisioning. And when I looked at the term AfriCobra, I was also thinking about Afrofuturism and the responsibility that we have to envision and depict ourselves in the future. Because when you look at the artwork that's done by some Europeans, you can see films that don't have us in them, and they're forward-looking films. So
For sure.
you see what I'm saying? Could you speak on that?
Yes, when we create imagery, we can place ourselves wherever we want to place ourselves. So if I could place a Black person on Sagala, the star, the Dogon star. We can do that. We don't have to. They give us Spider-Man and X-Men and all this kind of stuff. But we have the ability to place us wherever in the universe we can imagine. And that's why the power, we have to exercise that power of imagination.
Let me say one thing. Let me say one thing here. again, that's why it's so important, I think, that we have our own media sources to get our messaging out. That's why it's so important. I think art and music is going to be faced with the same hurdles, because what does music and what does art do for people? It evokes some type of imagery, emotion,
Hmm.
and things like that. And that's why the system works so hard to capture that and hold it hostage, that ability to get that type of information out, or that kind of imagery in what we're speaking on. It's so important to the powers that be to keep those kind of things in control, because they know what it inspires people, it causes inspiration in people, it gives people power, courage, and things like that. So art and music, it's going to be faced with those particular hurdles. And so we kind of like have to work in the backdrop of like, okay, we do those things. How can we, get our message out? How can we get it to a large group of people so they can see those things, to evoke the type of emotions and responses, and the will to do some things? How do we do that? And if we constantly, let me go back and let me digress a little bit. If we constantly give energy to other people's stuff, we're losing our power. That's why it's ever so important for us to know our culture and who we are, and know how really spiritual this whole humanistic experience is about, and how it relates to everything around you, the cosmos, the earth, the planet, things like that. So if you know timing is important when you're trying to do something, to give up certain energy or try to evoke certain things upon the planet, and from the spiritual world to the physical world. The timing is important. You sit up here doing something in the wrong time, to where the energy on the planet is like this, and the energy is on the planet is like this, or you should be doing this. Just like we always talk about around December 25th, when we get our good brothers or Dr. Brown or somebody on, and we talk about around December 25th, you should be meditating. You should be doing something else, rather than going around giving energy to something else. So that's why it's ever so important that we understand our culture, who we are, and because our ancestors understood this thing called life and our humanistic experience, and connection to this thing that we call nature and Mother Earth. It's important.
I agree.
All right.
Yeah, I wanted to share a little bit of Aziza's contemporaries real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Because she has some fantastic contemporary artists who she knows. This is Janua Moja. Janua is a fabric artist, and a lot of her work has helped groups like Sweet Honey and the Rock, and when they go on tour. But Janua is world known. She does performances around the world. Or used to. She's not doing as much now. But the last time we were together, we were in Cuba. Was it 2014, Aziz, or something like that?
Yeah.
And did a fashion show in Cuba. And interestingly enough, she did a fashion show in Cuba, and the last little girl wearing her fashions was maybe about 9 or 8 years old. She was Pablo Picasso's great niece. Picasso has family in Cuba. This is a very dear friend of Aziza's, Kerry James Marshall. He's at the top of his game right now. Wonderful spirit from Alabama by way of Los Angeles, and a student of Charles White.
Just hold that 1 second. I want you to look at that image that is to his right at the bottom there. In that image, there's a Black man and a Black woman embracing one another. Their children are in the back watching some type of a, what would you call that, Jawara? It's like he has imagined what television and computers would evolve into in the future. They are in a something like I don't want to call it a spaceship. I want to call it whatever Kerry has created there, but they are in the universe. You can see like Milky Way in the back there, and they're in the universe loving each other, their children enjoying this image that is alive, that he has created there. And what he's doing is injecting us into a time that we have not realized yet. And that is an extreme. During COVID, I used to meditate on this piece because I really didn't know what was going to happen. But I knew that piece gave me something to look forward to, something that will be. And that's an extremely powerful thing.
So my Afrofuturism, Carrie has been
that's
doing this kind of work for a long time. And this is Aziza, some of Aziza's work here. And Aziza loves Adinkra symbols, as you can see here.
Yes. Now the one right under me, that is a piece that was done for a all boys school here in Washington, D.C. There were a group of artists that had the opportunity, and it was an absolute pleasure to design work that would be in a school that was designed for Black boys. And so that piece there was titled, it was from oh goodness, it's going to leave me. Okay, it's from a African proverb: bundled sticks cannot be broken. Bundled sticks cannot be broken. And so I have this bundle of sticks there with the Adinkra symbols for adaptability, creativity, brotherhood, mixed in there with the sticks. And one of the young children came while I was working on it. And this piece weighs about 800 pounds. It's made of iron. And I chose iron because Black people were extraordinary blacksmiths. And I wanted those boys to understand that that's what that they had, that legacy of working iron. And it's about, I can't remember how many feet. It's about 35 feet by 8 feet. And a young man came while I was working on that. And he asked me, well, what does it mean? And I told him about the proverb. And he says, you know what? I play football. He says, I play football. He says, I'm going to use that. I'm going to remember that. And I thought, wow, I mean, what more could I ask for? The piece on the right that I'm standing in front of is from a series called French Doors. And I went to Paris. And when I went there, I just saw in Paris, France, the doors there are the most elaborate, gorgeous things you ever did want to see. And I was taking these pictures of these doors and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Where did this wood come from? Of course, I went back, and we have a globe here that shows you the different countries that came under the power, that were colonized by France. And I did a whole series on the colonization, French colonialism. And in those brushstrokes for me were the power of the ancestors that will come to France and say, my stuff will be returned. So these are the kind of things. The work is abstract. I don't even have a Black figure in there, but there are ideas and concepts in there that can be used for the upliftment and to give increase the vision of our people.
Aziza, I wanted to hold up something that demonstrates that phrase that you just shared with us: bundled sticks cannot be broken.
Yep.
That's fantastic.
Isn't it though?
And
right. And when you think about the cultural implications, this is a broom that I brought back from Ghana. I have probably maybe 2 or 3 of these, at least 2 that I know of. But these individual strands can fall out.
That's right.
But when they come out, you just put them back and you restore them. You know, this is really kind of a metaphor for us as a people when you think about it. Something as simple as a broom could have so much meaning in relationship to our culture. When you mentioned that, this is the first thing that came to mind.
Absolutely. And that's what we did. That's what we did. The designs on our bowls, our designs on our our eating utensils, and the fabric, they were constantly giving us messages about how to live, about how to be. And we can do this now. We can do this now. We can go around with a piece of fabric with a Mercedes-Benz symbol on it, or we can have a piece of fabric with Dr. Welsing's face on it. We can do this.
Yes.
It depends on what you want to evoke. You know, that's why imagery is so important.
Sure.
It's so important, and we have to regain the ability to put our imagery out there. I usually always give an analogy of we know what our children are taking in by the way they act. Look at them, you know, going out holding a gun like this here, you know, sideways. Where they get that from? They seen it. They seen it on television. You know, so we can see how they emulating all the negative things that we don't want them to emulate. But what are we doing to counteract that imagery? We got to put out some kind of positive imagery ourselves to counteract it. We're smart enough to identify, to see the likeness of what they're doing. But what are we doing what kind of imagery that we are putting out there in a grandiose scale that is counteracting what they're seeing? So that's why the system and the man make sure he controls what the output of that particular information, because it can change how we function in our day-to-day in our community if we is able to control that.
But you know, one thing that I do want to say is that sometimes we get a little too caught up in the scale of it. We don't have to always do everything so large. You know, if a church had a Saturday school and that community, those children came to that, it would have a tremendous impact. We have to understand the impact of the small things. If we are scholars, if they come and they visit our elementary schools and make themselves available, they can have a tremendous impact. You, with the knowledge that you have, if you make yourself available to small group, maybe there's a rites of passage group. Rites of passage groups are tremendous. The things that the children learn within that group will be with them for a lifetime and will find their way to their children and their children's children. It has tremendous impact. Sometimes we can get overwhelmed with wanting to do things so large that it's overwhelming. But sometimes just reaching out to a small community, to getting some of your children's friends together and talking about people in the family, people in the community that have done things. That we used to meet in the basement of a neighbor's house, and she would have one of her colleagues from Howard University to come down in her basement and give a lecture. The young people, we would be packed in there. People would say, oh, young people not going to go on a Saturday, Sunday and listen to. We were packed in there, and we couldn't wait to hear what was going to be said. We sometimes we underestimate our young people.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with that. I mean, real quick, Vince, I agree with you in saying that that's what, you know, and I wrote some things in reference to that. We're going to have to open up the churches, the mosques and everything, and teach that Saturday, Sunday school if we're going to close that gap. We're going to have to, like they say in sports, we're going to have to go double time. We're going to go, you know, we're going to have to go hardcore press. We're going to have to do those particular things. I agree. If we don't have the ability to actually start our own schools, then we're gonna have to do just like what you say. That's what Dr. Booker T, Copper Colonnade, and Professor Smalls. That's what we talk about. Do
Mm.
those things.
Yeah, right in our basements, right in our apartments.
Right.
We can do it. Malefi talks about a victory consciousness. That's what I want to hear. I want to hear what we can do, and we can do so much.
I agree.
Yeah, I want to amplify what you're saying because, we can think about impacting the entire world, or we can think about impacting the people who are within our respective spheres of influence.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like that story that someone from the Cleveland Association of Black Storytellers told on our program a few months ago. It was a story about the hummingbird, and there was a fire in the community, and the hummingbird was just able to collect a few drops of water and bring those few drops of water to put on the fire. And the people were asking, well, why do you do that? That one drop is not going to make that much of a difference. But the hummingbirds, and I'm not telling the story the way they told it, but the idea is that everybody doing what they can do can have an impact on the entire movement. And that's what we have to do. You can reach so many people through their art, through your art. And it doesn't even have to be something where there are words. You created something, somebody receives it, it moves them in a certain way. You fulfilled your purpose as an artist. Absolutely. Everybody functioning within their own respective purposes and their own skills and abilities, doing what they do affects the entire group of us. It's that whole idea of Ubuntu. We all exist for the benefit of others. We've been on for a couple of hours and we've gotten so much information. I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to our elder Paul Hill, Fanon Hill, and Navasha, and the work that they're doing with the Mountain Movers Project. The idea of rites of passage. Elder Hill is a national, and I would venture to say international spokesman for that whole idea. And Aziza, you talked about the impact of rites of passage. We definitely need more of that. Our young people need to be raised with a certain sense of who they are and what their purpose is, what their responsibilities to the family are, what their responsibility to our race are. We have to do as much as we can to cultivate them, because the state of a people rests, as Elder Hill reminds us all the time, in the quality of life for their children. Before we get out of here, I just want to ask if there's anything that you would like folks to know about what you're doing, maybe projects that you have coming up. Aziza, you mentioned the exhibition that's currently in progress. If you share that with us, I'll make sure to post it to the YouTube description of this program, and we'll get that out there. But either of you, is there anything that you're working on right now that you would like to share with the viewing audience?
Yeah, Aziza stays busy. She got about 11 things going on at any one moment. So it's she'd give you a list of many things. And presently I'm trying to put together some brothers to do like cross-generational dialogue and discussion. We've done some, Saturday academies and things like that over the years. So I'm trying to conceptualize, ways to have conversation with brothers who are in their 40s. I'm in my 60s right now, and with brothers who are in their 70s and their 30s and their 40s. So that we have like, folks like you said, Brother Hamtonio, who and Brother Vince, who are close to us in proximity and willing to be engaged. So that's what we're working on.
Okay.
Yes. And I'm working with a group, Black Artists of DC. We are working to develop strong artists, to understand the business of it, to have critiques so that we can encourage them to push themselves harder, to identify concepts that they are want to express and help them to express it better. So we have a website, blackartistsofdc.com. And there you can see just a smidgen of some of the artists that we have worked with over the years. And many of our young artists have gone on to be exhibiting all over the world. So
that's a great idea, sister. And I would, I guess, amplify that by saying that just recently, I realized that we have programs to develop community leadership. Here in Cleveland, they have the Neighborhood Leadership Institute or Neighborhood Leadership Development Institute. Have a couple of different paradigms like that. But I was just thinking that we need to have development for artists as leaders in our community. And then the other piece is that sometimes as artists, we can get so involved in the practice of art that we neglect the business aspect of it. But in order for you to be successful as an artist and be able to exist on your art and not having to work a 9 to 5, you have to have a certain business sense as well. So, you know, I just happen to be an artist advocate here in Cleveland. So the issues that you're talking about are near and dear, and we're doing what we can to move the needle. We just received $3.2 million. And I think I spoke about this at the program that you were at. But $3.2 million to fund art projects that are led by artists is unprecedented in this city. And, you know, we live in a city where a majority of the municipal budget goes to public safety. That has to change.
Yes.
Because hiring more police officers, that's not the solution to the things that cause police to have to respond to things that they respond to.
Yeah.
We have to get to the heart of the causes of the dysfunction in our environment. And there are many, you know, there's the environmental dangers that we live in. There's the whole idea of us living in certain zip codes and having lower life expectancies and all of that. I mean, there's just so many things going on, but just bringing it back full circle, we have to look at the things that we can do within our own respective spheres of influence to make an impact and trust. There are people all across this country that look at the problems in their community and they ask themselves, what can I do about it? And they don't just ask, they take matters into their own hands. And mainstream media would give you, you know, they give you the opposite view. They give you a certain sense of hopelessness that we can't do anything about it. And we just got to deal with whatever they shovel our way. But we know that we are a great and mighty people. We're responsible for civilization. Let's just make it plain. If it weren't for the things that we have brought, even through being enslaved in this country, you look at all of the inventions that African Americans are responsible for that have not just impacted the United States, but have impacted the entire planet. And then you look at the creativity that's coming from the continent of Africa, our brothers and sisters over there. I saw something where they took tires, one of the most profound wastes that exists on the planet. And they took tires and they were able to create bricks that could be used to build things, to make roads and stuff like that. This is what we do. You know, young African brother figures out a way to use water to power a car. You know, these are the things that these so-called primitive people who are uneducated and unintelligent, these are the things that we are doing. So we have to reverse that narrative and to Brother Hamtonio's point, create these different images. Dr. Hunter, that's what you're doing with these fantastic PowerPoints that you do. So much history, so much information to be uncovered. You know, we are doing the things that we talk about we need to do. We're doing them. So let's embrace that and continue to move things forward. I want to thank you, Dr. and Mrs. Hunter, Gibson Hunter, for joining us today. Brother Hamtonio, is there anything that you want to share with us before we wrap up the show today?
Just one thing, you know, and I think it is very important when we talk about these approaches we have to get certain institutions that understand this collective that we talking about, the importance of our culture and images and things like that. And then we have these other disciplines like music, art, health, and all those things. Those things, those we have to have one entity that kind of understands these things and is working in concert and orchestrating the same goal. Being on the same page. And I think that could be the issue with people doing this over here. We fragmented doing this. If we could get some type of collective to understand, okay, you do your piece and you evoking this type of imagery, the same type of imagery through your type of discipline that we're trying to get across. If you guys understand what I'm trying to say, everybody doing their part to set up the same or to get the same results. So we using music, the music is hitting and signifying on these points. The art is supporting this here. The health is bringing this point in. The economic is so this whole, everybody taking this different spokes in the wheel to make this, to get to the same goal that you're trying to get to, and it's some type of collective cooperative effort in doing that. So those type of mechanisms and systems and that type of mythology that we're gonna have to set up.
All right. Thank you so much, brother. And again, thank you to our esteemed guests. Continue to do what you do, and there is hope for the planet. As always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, do everything that you can to make today your absolute best day. Peace, progress, and progress to everyone.
Peace, peace.
Peace, 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 peace. Thank you so